For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted. For our second episode in the Deadly Poison series, we're digging into possibly one of the best-known poisons in history, strychnine. Before we begin, this is your regularly scheduled disclaimer that I'm just a lady who loves plants. I'm not a doctor, nor am I a pharmacist. Nothing I say in this podcast should be taken as medical advice, or honestly, even just life advice. Before you make any changes in your personal diet or care routine, you should check in with your care team and do your own research. Also, while it's fun to learn about the historical uses of poison, it's not okay to kill people, so don't do that. Thanks. While there are a few plants that contain strychnine, today we're going to be focusing on Strychnos nux vomica, or the strychnine tree. Best known for its hairy discus seeds, this tree is native to India and Southeast Asia. It's a member of a notoriously toxic family, the Loganaceae family, with poisonous relatives like ropebush and Loganea. We might talk about them in a mini episode at some point, but they have very similar methods of action despite containing a few different toxins. If you enjoy learning about obscure poisonous plants, that one is absolutely worth a deep dive. But back to the star of our show, Nux vomica is a medium-sized tree with a short, smooth, and ash-colored stump and dark green oval leaves. As a botanical weirdo, it actually blooms when it gets colder, kind of like witch hazel, and when it does, it produces light green funnel-shaped flowers which apparently reek. Once it's done stinking up the place, it produces an apple-sized fruit that is light orange and smooth, with a soft white inner flesh and 5 super poisonous bitter seeds. Apparently, there are a few species of birds and monkeys that do eat the fruit, but nobody snacks on the seeds. Just like last week, they're a bad time for absolutely everyone. If you've ever read any of those old school classic mysteries, you've probably heard of strychnine before. And while it is super poisonous, it wasn't always used just to kill people. Across time and history, Nux vomica has also been used as a medicine to treat tummy troubles, heart problems, and even as a cancer treatment. Though it's super important to note that today it is not suggested you ingest strychnine for any reason, as even a very small amount can be absolutely lethal. Typically, if it was used in medicine, it was often leached in water and or milk, but it's very worth noting that strychnine, the toxin, is not water-soluble and is just barely soluble in alcohol, so odds are decent that in many cases it just wasn't present in the final mix. In some misguided or desperate cases, this was a solution due to the fact that it allows muscles to contract more freely in very small amounts, which made it useful in helping with digestion issues and helping the heart to beat just a little bit more regularly. The way it works is that strychnine blocks glycine, a neurotransmitter that basically stops the muscles from moving about all willy-nilly. Strychnine instead kind of throws that baby out with the bathwater and moves right on in, telling your muscles to react to everything. The results are a few moments of being a little twitchy, maybe a little bit jazzed, followed by very intense and painful convulsions, and finally death. On the bit about maybe being a bit more cheery, Strychnine was also reportedly used to help give people a bit of a boost in energy, with the most infamous occurrence of this actually happening in the absolutely insane 1904 Olympic Marathon. Picture it with me. It's a hot and humid day in 1904 St. Louis. Temperatures are in the mid-90s, and organizers have plotted a race that is 24.84 miles of pure hell. The roads are made entirely of dirt, littered with large stones and debris. It's not very well marked, and, oh yeah, there will be no water for over 12 miles in the race. To make matters even more alarming, the dirt road is so dry that it's kicking up tons of dust, coating the runners' throats and making it even harder to see. 8 miles from the finish, one runner had to quit because he inhaled so much dust that it actually ripped his throat and stomach from the dryness. If that wasn't chaotic enough, the runners themselves were quite the cast of characters. Some of them had literally never run a marathon before. One guy got bored and started finding mid-race snacks, starting by just yapping with some spectators who gave him peaches, and then fully beelining into an orchard where he ate a bunch of rotten apples and then just took a nap. Another contestant was entirely unable to finish after he was chased off course by a wild dog. But potentially even more wild than these instances is the experience of the winner, American athlete Thomas Hicks. Hicks received what I would say is probably an unconventional and unfair amount of support, which at the time was actually permissible within reason. Hicks' coaches were dead set on helping the man win, so much so that at mile 10 they wiped his mouth out with a damp rag. At the time they thought being dehydrated was like the key to performing well, so no water for that guy. And then they sent him on his merry way to run 7 more miles, where instead of water, they were waiting for him with a mixture of egg whites and strychnine, which at the time was used as rat poison. As you might imagine, this resulted in a very interesting final 7 miles for Hicks, who was set to win until a fellow teammate who had secretly but not so secretly hitched a ride came out of absolutely nowhere and sprinted to the finish. Feeling defeated, woozy, and honestly over it, Hicks wanted to quit. But hope was not lost. Almost immediately after the win, it was revealed that his teammate cheated, and Hicks' coaches wasted no time. They literally pulled up next to this guy in the middle of the race, gave him more of their messed up pre-workout, and this time, they made this man wash it down with brandy. At this point, Hicks is not doing so hot. People reported he looked like an actual zombie. His running was mechanical, his jaw was literally just hanging open, and, oh yeah, he started hallucinating. At one point, he was literally crying for some reason, and he thought he had 20 miles to go. He begged for food, he begged to stop, but his coaches instead threw 2 more egg whites in his mouth, scooped him up, and basically Weekend at Bernie's him across that finish line, securing his place on that pedestal with a time of roughly 3 hours and 28 minutes. To put it in perspective, the average time to run a marathon is about 4 hours and 30 minutes, but the slowest time for the male division of the Olympic marathon in 2024 was 2 hours and 42 minutes. Conditions and techniques have come a long way since 1904, and for that, we should all be very grateful. Obviously, things usually end in tragedy versus gold medal when it comes to poisoning. As far as symptoms go, strychnine poisoning is probably exactly what you think of with poison, even if you didn't realize it. It makes people feel kind of strange but energetic, then sick. They might even puke. After that, though, they start twitching as their muscles tighten, followed by full-on convulsions and eventually ending up in a back-arching, face-twisting death caused typically by the constriction of a person's airways. Symptoms typically start within 15 to 20 minutes of ingestion or absorption. Historically speaking, we have no shortage of true crime cases that we could cover for this episode, with strychnine coming in at number 3 of the top 10 most common poisons. Starting strong, it's believed that Alexander the Great was actually poisoned when someone slipped strychnine into his wine. In another case of betrayal by treat, there is the infamous case of chocolate creams. Creams, of course, that had been poisoned by one Christiana Edmonds in Brighton, England in the 1870s. According to her own mother, Christiana had always been a bit strange. She had a very privileged upbringing, but her father passed when she was a child, and her mother never remarried, which in part led to a hysteria diagnosis in her 20s. The 1860s saw Christiana falling in love with a local doctor, setting alight a scandal as he was very much married. It's not confirmed they were ever truly romantically involved, but Christiana was absolutely in love with the doctor, going so far as to poison his wife with a strychnine-infused chocolate. She did make a full recovery, but this unlocked a kind of morbid fascination in Christiana, who would go on to purchase and inject many more chocolates over the course of the next decade. Now, I know what you're thinking. How did they not catch her? And the answer is honestly pretty simple. She was kind of careful. She would purchase the chocolates and then return them to the confectioner after having poisoned only 1 or 2 in the batch, and then the confectioner would just resell them. People would, of course, get sick, but no one ever died that we know of, and most just brushed it off as stress or having eaten something bad. That was until tragically a young boy ate one of the poisoned chocolates and died on a vacation with his family. This raised suspicions, but of course, no one could trace it back to her. The death was ruled an accident, and everyone kind of just moved on. While she had been careful to craft a cover story that she was buying strychnine to get rid of stray cats, Christiana decided she needed to be even more cautious and started to pay the young boy in her neighborhood to buy strychnine for her. This went on for years, but eventually the thrill of someone random getting a little sick wore off, so she started sending these chocolates as gifts to prominent figures of the time, making sure to also send some to herself and report it to the police in hopes of framing the chocolate maker. Messed up, I know. However, this plan didn't work, as before long her former flame/stalking victim, Dr. Burns, informed the police of what had happened years ago, and they arrested Christiana for attempted murder of his wife, as well as the murder of that child. She wouldn't serve time in prison, though. Instead, she spent the rest of her life in Blackmore Asylum, where she died in 1907. But if that's still not enough for you, just a few years later, in 1878, Thomas Cream would begin his string of strychnine poisoning, targeting mainly women who were seeking out abortions. Thomas Cream was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1850, but relocated to Canada shortly after he was born, where Thomas would remain through most of his medical schooling. During his schooling in Canada, he met and fell in love with a young woman named Flora, who he would eventually perform an abortion he was not qualified to perform on, resulting in her getting extremely sick. Thomas attempted to flee, but her father stopped him and forced him to marry Flora, who did recover from this attempt, but still passed a few months later in 1877 due to tuberculosis. However, while they were married, Thomas did actually leave to go to England to continue his medical training, so he never actually saw his wife after marrying her. Kind of rude, but honestly I bet he was insufferable. He did return to North America, this time heading to London, Ontario, where he would start his medical malpractice. Despite having a history of malpractice at this point, many desperate patients had still seen Thomas for help, and he quickly developed a reputation. Things seemed to be going okay until one day a woman was found dead behind his office, believed to have been killed with chloroform. Thomas would claim this woman begged him for an abortion, but he declined and she threatened to kill herself if he didn't help her. No one truly believed this to be the case, especially because this whole story just wasn't really adding up, but they didn't have any evidence, just a letter he claimed she wrote, but in no way matched her actual handwriting. Shortly after this, Cream would move to Chicago, Illinois, where he would set up shop near the red light district. It was here that he started officially offering illegal abortions to sex workers, this time being accused of killing 2 women right off the bat, but once again getting away with it because of a lack of evidence. In 1881, a woman named Alice died from strychnine poisoning less than a block from Cream's office, raising eyebrows from those around him and suspicion from the police. In July of that same year, he was accused and tried for the murder of Daniel Scott, who allegedly bought epilepsy medication from Cream, but then died from strychnine poisoning, and it was found that Cream was actually having an affair with his wife, and believed that the two conspired to kill her husband. However, in court, Mrs. Scott would blame this entirely on Thomas, who would be sentenced to life in prison, but would be pardoned 3 years later because his brother appealed and probably bribed the governor. Thomas actually ended up getting caught because he had this nasty habit of accusing pharmacists of poisoning people and then trying to extort them, which is kind of wild, but great as a crazy thing. Upon his release, Cream fled to London, once again targeting sex workers, this time killing several before anyone started to grow suspicious. At this point, he was exclusively using strychnine, giving women 2 pills and causing their deaths mere hours after ingestion. He was also still framing pharmacists and doctors, this time sending scary letters and threatening the police, who quickly realized they were dealing with a serial killer they dubbed the Lambeth Killer, because that's the part of London he was in. Thomas would get away with this for a while, but eventually his need for attention would get the better of him when he gave an NYC police officer, who was just on vacation, a very detailed walking tour of where all the Lambeth Killer's victims lived, and started sharing an awful lot of details on the case. Not thrilled with the eeriness of this experience, the New York City police officer told London police about his weird-ass tour, and they put Cream under surveillance, which quickly gave them enough evidence to convict him. This trial was the absolute talk of the town, with tons of attention from the press, especially since Jack the Ripper had been active nearby only 3 years prior. As a side note, he absolutely loathed being called Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, and instead wanted to just be referred to as Dr. Thomas Neal. So naturally the press called him Dr. Cream, and I dropped the doctor altogether. Apparently, even with the alleged letter from Jack the Ripper claiming his innocence, the jury deliberated for only about 12 minutes before finding Thomas Cream guilty, and a month later, he was hanged. His executioner did try to posit the theory that he was Jack the Ripper, saying his last words were, "I am Jack the," but this was pretty quickly debunked since the killings had happened while Cream was still in prison in Chicago. One theory is that perhaps Cream actually went to London, committing the murders as Jack, while a hired body double served his time for him. Though this seems very unlikely, as anyone they talked to, and the letters they were able to find written by Cream himself seemed to verify he was in prison. Another theory that I personally like a little bit better is that perhaps Cream was so frightened and losing control of his body that he actually screamed, "I'm ejaculating," but the executioner just heard him wrong. That's a conspiracy theory, but I think it does make sense, even if it's weird and gross to think about. And also, I just kind of like that it paints him as like a weird, sad ninny. As far as motives go, it's believed that while Cream did do this in part for money, he mostly murdered these women for the thrill of being so completely in control of them, even though he rarely saw the effects of his poisons. The good news is that today, most people do live after ingesting strychnine accidentally. Typically, treatment includes giving the patients benzodiazepines and plenty of fluids, as well as sometimes intubating folks to make sure their airways don't close. Depending on how quickly treatment is received and the amount of poison absorbed, most people can live with very few, if any, complications, which usually consist of neurological and kidney issues if complications should arise. Overall, I think we can all agree that strychnine, as interesting as it is to read about, isn't something we should be overly excited to encounter in our day-to-day. It is sometimes still used as pest control, but in a post-Agatha Christie world, it's much more regulated and used more sparingly. If you ever do see a strychnine tree, you can say hello, maybe skip the head kiss, and think about how glad we should all be that we aren't currently running the 1907 marathon. That's all I've got for this week. But I'll be back next week to dive into a deadly poison that might just be lurking in your fruit bowl: cyanide. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this show, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can follow us on social media at rooted.pod. We're on Instagram and TikTok. We're also on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, and so much more. Thank you so much for being here and learning with me. This show simply wouldn't be possible without your support. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. Rooted, a Plant Podcast, is a Henbay Media LLC production. It's written and produced by me, M. Grebner Gaddis, with theme music by Eric Clarkson.